Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We are going to continue on with this week's theme of love songs. I did expand it out a little bit with the theming. I kind of originally wanted to just do positive love songs, but I figured that given the metal and rock angle that I didn't think too many people would have requests that would fit within it. So I allowed it to be negative love songs as well, whereas maybe you're longing to be with somebody you love or something along those lines. I think that's what we're going to be checking out today. We have some Colin Stetson. This is going to be a fairly long one, I'm pretty sure. Primarily because we're looking at an entire reimagining of a symphony. The description that was given to me, it says the general theme is love, but a sorrowful one. The lyrics from the second movement were partially taken from a wall of a cell in Palace Hotel in Zakopane, from a place where Nazis were imprisoning many Polish and Jewish people before they had been taken to Auschwitz. Instrumentation is pretty much what you would expect from modern metal plus Stetson's contrabass clarinet, but musically the piece doesn't stray away from the original at all. So that's what we're getting into here. We are looking at, the first movement is 28 minutes, the second is 10, and the final movement is 13, almost 14. We got a lot of music ahead of us. Let's dive in and see how Colin Stetson interprets Goretzky with Sorrow. An interesting detail there. The fact that he multi-tracked this and uses circulatory breathing means that we almost have a second voice to all of this. Those sharp inhales. Well, sharp breaths. Is there a Canon going on in here? I swear I hear the same phrase kind of being repeated but delayed. I'm not so sure anymore. Every once in a while, it's like a, I don't know, an echo. An echo from the future. Similar idea, just in a different space. do like the electric guitars coming in. I thought it was going to be a little jarring, given the bass clarinet, but it works. First, I found the cymbal swells to be a little off-putting, but I think they're growing on me. Much like the 16th notes on the guitars, it's creating a tension that's alluded to in the harmonic work elsewhere, but really being leaned into in those elements from a sonic perspective. I do wish that I had the sheet music for this though. Not only is this already dense, but it's sonically and produced to have an extra layer of weight to it. It makes it very difficult to hear individual ideas. Out of all of that noise and cacophony, we have two voices so intricately dancing around one another. So we wrap up that counterpoint melody and just allow the final tone to hang out like a drone. Curious what gets built on this. Lot of warmth in the beginning of this. layers upon layers of the same idea to be very effective. It creates something wildly unwieldy. And I think a lot of that has to do with the production on this as well. There's a drum back there, maybe a bass drum or a tom. Just constantly hitting. It almost sounds like clipping. Like constant flickering of white noise on a faulty cable. Little light movement over here. We're pushing back to where we started, aren't we? Sounded like an upright bass. But this is all woodwind, isn't it? This is an extremely patient movement. My general understanding of it so far has been a slow burn with a couple of variations, but for the most part, several sections are just fully exploring a specific sounds. See, in talking about sheet music, to me this sounds like a lot of drone. It's a lot of texture and noise. I don't hear anything else though. I don't know if I'm missing that because of the production of the instruments, or if that's all that this is supposed to be. All right, I want to talk about that real quick before we move into the next movement. As I mentioned, a lot of that feels like a slow burn. There's melodic ideas throughout that passage, sure, but I feel like a majority of it is, if not a true canon, then canon-like. And a canon is when multiple people or roles or parts or instruments play the same melody, just time displaced from one another. So maybe the first instrument plays for the first bar, and when they start bar 2, someone else is going to start on bar 1, so they'll always be one bar behind each other. As the first one moves to the third bar and the second one moves to the first bar, now a third one's going to jump in and land on the first bar. And this time displacement can be anything, every beat, every other bar, whatever. As long as all the musicians are playing the exact same thing, just starting at different times. There is plenty of what feels like to me as echoes going on in this track, where I hear a melody or an idea, and then moments later I'll hear it again in a brand new environment A lot of that's going to come down to all of the layering, creating clashing feelings and moments. It's tough for me to put into words how this environment changes because for the most part, it doesn't. I mean, a lot of this song has a very similar feeling to it emotionally, atmospherically, sonically, even. That it's tough for me to say, oh, 4 bars later I hear this again, but it's in a totally different context. It is to me. I hear it, I'm like, no, that's not what's supposed to be played around it, or maybe even more importantly, or more accurately, that's not what was played around it the last time I heard that little phrase. That usually happens in canons, or sometimes they're called rounds. Because you'll hear an idea and it will be played against the bar previously, if we go back to my example. But the next time you hear it will be from instrument 2 and it will be played against bar 1 again, but also now against bar 3. And for every instrument you add this to, there's going to be another layer added to it. You're going to hear it into a new multi-layered context that can drastically change the harmonic values of it. It can change the atmospheric values of it. And that's what happens here. I feel like there's constant recontextualization of melodic phrases that I can pick up on and hear again later. But it takes its time. It's not like this 1 bar gap that I used in my example. There's distance, there's time between these ideas, multiple seconds. Sometimes it feels like it's 30 seconds later, I'll hear it. I'll be like, oh, wait, that's the thing we just got done playing, but it's like totally new now. I feel like that happens in a lot of this. It ends up creating a song that to me feels fresh, new at every moment, but simultaneously hyper repetitive. I don't think that I have a lot to comment on here. Some broad stroke ideas, sure, but specifics, not really. And I think it's because at least what I heard was a couple of key ideas just repeated and overlaid and staggered on creating these incredibly dense moments. When we didn't have a recognizable melody present, there's a lot of drone, a lot of just noise, static elements present, which are almost always present on the low end. The lowest notes are just held out for such a long time, creating the floor, the foundation of the song. But we even had that higher pitched drone white noise thing going on around, I don't know, 60, 70% into the song. I don't know, 16, 18, 20 minutes in, something like that. It took a long time to even get to that, and it didn't feel that too displaced from where we started, which was also on long held out notes, just a couple of octaves lower. The song, as I mentioned, feels like a really long, slow burn. Start with these ideas, layer up some ideas on top of that, drop back to the bottom, start removing some ideas to replace them with new ones. And eventually you're going to slowly create new ideas, recontextualizing concepts that we had heard once within new environments. But a lot of it takes place on the same idea. Even that melody that I felt was in a canon, we heard again. We distanced ourselves from it for a bit, 5, 6 minutes maybe, and I'm pretty sure we came back to that same exact idea. What this ends up creating is something contradictory. As I said, it's fresh every moment. I think that the collective combinations of where every instrument is constantly changes. I think if you look at the exact moment to moment sheet music of what everyone is playing in this bar versus the next bar versus the next, I think you'll find a song that very rarely revisits the exact same thing. It is constantly moving on several axes, and never do all of them line back up again in any way that is recognizable. But that if you're just listening to it generally, I think a lot of it ends up sounding very similar. And so it moves, to me at least, through just a couple of different ideas, where each of those ideas are really leaned into. We sit within them for minutes, 6, 7, 8, 9 at a time, it seems like. Changing on the most smallest scale, but on the largest, not really going anywhere at all. It's impressive to listen to. I think there's very little that captures that exact kind of feeling. It's almost like, I don't know, looking at anything static. Your skin, a desk, I don't know, a bed even. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't move. It doesn't change. You just look at your skin and it's skin, right? But you put that under a microscope, it's a bustling city of microorganisms. There's so much movement going on. That's what this song feels like to me. Constantly changing, constantly re-expressing and recontextualizing itself. There's always something new going on. It's just really easy to lose sight of all that because those changes are on such a microscopic level. It's one of the reasons why I would have liked some sheet music on this. There is certainly some classical music that we've listened to in the past, and I didn't have sheet music for, and I think my analysis was fine without it. Probably would have been improved with it. I think every time I have sheet music, my analysis segments are greatly improved, but I did okay with them. I think this is one where I need the sheet music. It's like a microscope to me. I get to see more detail in the fine elements. So what I'm left with is an experience that largely feels like it moves at a glacial pace through a few rather large ideas. And so my core feeling for this is a slow evolution of emotion. We start the track off with just this really low, quiet bass clarinet. I mean, this is low. In fact, if you didn't tell me it was a bass clarinet, I might have guessed something else. Probably something related to an oboe, probably a very low register in the a low instrument in the oboe family. Because even knowing this, I'm like, is that a bass clarinet? Is it not a contrabass clarinet? Because these are some low tones. But regardless, it's definitely a woodwind. I think that's what matters, and it's certainly a reeded instrument in the woodwind family. Definitely nothing. Well, I mean, I don't know if there's a low flute that could get down here, but even if so, it'd have the wrong timbre. We're definitely looking at something with a buzzing piece of wood. It's quiet. I don't know if y'all heard all of it. I had to turn my headphones up quite a bit louder than usual, and I'm pretty sure that my volume's already higher than what I put in the video anyways. Eventually, it takes minutes. I think we even got to minute 4, and I was wondering if I should just turn the volume up for y'all, but I knew we would eventually hit volume cap, where I normally maxed out the volume anyways. But it was just quiet for so long. There's just these exceptionally low tones. It's a slow moving passage. We had another bass clarinet here, and then another, and then another. And the pitches continue to rise. The first one is the lowest. Every instrument added later has a little bit boost to the range. Never quite hitting that low tone anymore. Eventually having some stuff that even feels like it's a bit in the treble clef. Each one of these brings a new texture to it. Overall, doesn't change, I think, the pacing of the song, but it does recontextualize that low moodiness that we started off with. Each of these also brings their own volume boost to the song as well. I generally like this build-up. I'm not a big fan of how long it takes. I think it's necessary to convey this feeling, but I would have liked things to move just a little bit faster. And this might be a place where having the sheet music might have helped engage my brain a little bit more with what's going on, especially at this point where the electric guitars start to come in. Around this time, we kind of enter into what I want to point towards as the post-metal element of the movement, and it extends itself through a vast majority of the rest of this track. We have all of these layers of a single instrument, of the bass clarinet. We bring in electric distorted guitars around that, and then we add more white noise with a lot of cymbals. A lot of cymbals. I had mentioned that they didn't really start out as something that I felt was a positive, but I ended up appreciating them more as they went on. It creates an anxiety that we sort of showcased a bit in the harmony, but didn't really present itself in a sort of more physical way in the song. And I think that the cymbals and the 16th note guitar playing really leans into that. It creates this extra texture. But this begins my first big problem with this, and why I call it the post-metal portion. There's so much sound here between all of the instruments. It's really difficult to hear what any single one of them is doing. And the fact that many of the layers are all the same instrument, whether it is the guitars pushed out to the side or the clarinets stacked on top of each other, there's a lot of timbre sharing going on that you don't get in full orchestras. Yes, there's going to be some timbre overlap, but the trumpets don't sound like the trombones, they don't sound like the flutes, they don't sound like the violins, they don't sound like the timpanis. There's so many different flavors, sounds, characteristics going on in a full orchestra that you can overlap a lot of these ideas and they're not going to blend into each other as easily as we see here. I call this post-metal because it ends up creating a wall of noise to me. I can hear moments, the melody that sticks out to me every once in a while. But the thing is it pops out, I'm like, oh, I recognize that, and then it fades back into the mass. Only for, 40, 50, 60 seconds later for it to pop up again. A noticeable point in this static wall, this length of audio that doesn't have any defined character to it. It's just a lot of white noise to me. It really makes me curious about the original. I have not listened to it, and I'm kind of regretting not having checked it out first. But I am bogged down this week, so I simply didn't have time to add another hour-long listening into my work schedule for this week. Because this is a full album right here, all three movements of this Sorrow track, and I also have to do two other album reactions this week as well. And I played it back and forth. I looked through the schedule. There was no way I was going to be able to fit another hour-long listen in here. But I'm very much regretting it now, because this feels like, on the surface, my gut says that this is a feature of Colin's version. But I think that I'm slightly discrediting what you can do with an orchestra. You can certainly make wall of sound if that's what you want. And so I'm curious now if this is a decision Colin made, listening to the original, saying, well, I think this could be improved by muddying everything up and making it difficult to discern the details. Or if this was already a baked-in element of Goretzky's original, and Colin just leaned into it with the distortion of the guitars. and the similarity in the clarinet being so many different layers. The end result to me, though, is something that feels more trance-like than I was expecting. Than I was expecting for Goretzky, but not for Stetson. What I've listened to from Stetson, trance-like certainly it checks out. That's what I expect from him, and I didn't think about that at all. And see, now I'm even more intrigued. Did Stetson gravitate towards this because it naturally complements his style, or did he find a way to put his own spin on it? Yeah. So now I gotta go check that out. Now, what I like about this, though, is that it doesn't stop there. This wall of sound is actually created as a foundation for a vocal melody to put on top of. And I thought this was wonderful. It creates something large, dense, very heavy, and I don't know about the emotional element yet. We'll get to that in a second, I suppose. The song, the entire album is called Sorrow. I definitely felt negative emotions here, but sorrow? I don't know if that's the word I would use, at least for this segment, this movement here. Regardless, it's heavy, it's dense, it's just this big, unwieldy sound, and then a single, clear, beautifully delivered, with excellent vibrato melody line is put on top of that. That was a powerful moment for me, I think. The song builds up this massive tone and then complements it with a sound that just sort of cuts through that. There's some excellent chordal movement through here as well. I melted so many times as a tension was introduced into the progression and then resolved in a way not usually with a full resolution, but enough to feel a release from all of the anticipation, and in a way that I think was a little spicy too. Just not necessarily exactly the direction I was expecting, a little mix of familiarity and surprise. We do end up in this moment with the vocals here moving towards something a bit lighter, removing some of the weight both harmonically and production wise. It doesn't last long though, and it pulls us into, I think, the darkest moment of the track. It was certainly the heaviest. I think that was where the vocals stopped too. Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong on that one. But it was about this time then as well that we began to do the reverse slow burn. And over the course of, like 7 minutes, we slowly removed ideas until we got back to the beginning. This was another part that I found to be just a hair bit too slow. I like this concept, removing the weight to find the core again. It just, to me, it gets dragged out a little bit, a lot of bit. But again, I think part of it too is the production on this. Again, I want to check out Goretzky's original and see if this wall of sound is a part of that. If I can hear each individual idea, I might not have found that to be as lengthy as it felt, even though it was quite a bit of time, but I might enjoy it a little bit more. And again, sheet music can also help with this too. When all I can hear, when all I can understand is what I can hear, and the intention here is to obfuscate information, I'm not getting a lot of it other than the emotional resonance of it. And well, I suppose we should talk about that real quick. What is the emotion here? I have a hard time figuring it out. There are moments in here that I do find beautiful, positively joyous. I think that's more of my reaction, though, to the harmonic information, the chord progressions themselves, the rising and falling of tension, the narrative that the progression itself delivers. I don't know if any moment in the song is joyful, but it does put a smile on my face. But a majority of the song is noisy. It's uncomfortable. It's tinted with darkness. Could we use these words to describe sorrow? I think. But like I said, in particular, I don't really get sorrow out of this. I don't know what I get. It feels a bit too complex to put into one word. As dark, as heavy as this track can be, it certainly feels oppressive in a lot of ways, but there's elements of positivity in it too. Fleeting moments, sure, sometimes lasting a little longer than others, but it's almost as if there's hope baked into it, fleeting but never disappearing, the campfire that just doesn't go out. Gets smaller. Really looks like it's done. Somehow that flame keeps going though. This is the longest movement. 28 and a half minutes. The others are 10 and 14. A third of the length. Well, I guess 2 is a third. Movement 3 is about half. I'm ready to dive into the next one, see where this journey goes, but I do want to look up the lyrics for Movement 1 real quick, see if that can help paint a picture more so than the vague concepts I have that I heard in the track. Alright, real quick, this is just a short little poem. It is the Lamentation of the Holy Cross Monastery from the Lysagora Songs collection. Comes from the second half of the 15th century. It says, "My son, my chosen and beloved, share your wounds with your mother, and because, dear son, I have always carried you in my heart, and always served you faithfully, speak to your mother to make her happy, although you are already leaving me, my cherished hope." It's simply of a mother who just wants her son to make sure that he remembers her. Says, "I've always done what I can for you, and I know you are on your way to, into adulthood. I'm going to assume," says, "although you're already leaving me, um, it's, speak to me, spend some time with me," that kind of thing. There's positivity to this. In fact, the whole thing is out of love. It says that you're everything to me. Just share with me your wounds. Talk to me. Speak to me. Make me happy. That kind of thing. I've done everything I can for you. I hope that I can continue to be there for you as you enter into adulthood, as you leave the nest. Bittersweet is the word, I suppose. Here's the other twist, though. The other thing. I was looking up lyrics for this, and they're not on, Genius or Lyric websites or anything. I found this on a random education website that has broken picture links, so it might not even be maintained anymore. But I also found the Wikipedia page. I was hoping maybe it would be in here, since it does describe that all the lyrics, I mean, I guess they are lyrics or sung, in this entire song is poems. So I was hoping they'd list them here. They don't. But I went down to the discography, and I don't even know why I was down here. I think I was just looking for the notes. And I saw in 2019, Beth Gibbons and Penderecki did a version of this. And I was like, wait a second, that combination seems pretty darn familiar. So I went over to my YouTube channel, my studio side of things, and I looked it up. And sure enough, we've checked out the third movement of this song with Beth Gibbons doing the vocals and piano, was it, right? we checked that out about 2 years ago. It was April 2023. So I went and listened to a little bit of it. I didn't listen to the whole thing, but again, I'm really intrigued about what the original sound. And granted, it was Mvt III. We didn't check out the first one, so I don't really have an exact thing, but there's a lot of clarity in the music there. So I'm curious how Colin is going to continue this on with movements 2 and 3. So let's get into that. Movement 2. Dude, that clarinet, man, it has so much body to it. Yeah, this is just haunting. is an interesting twist for the end of this song. Yeah, those drums, they have a lot of forward energy, both in their tone and in their fills. This entire song has been incredibly heavy emotionally. And this, I mean, it's still heavy, but it feels like it picks up an energy. Yeah, I don't think I should be dancing to this, but the drums invite that. Particularly that the drums have syncopation to them, where the song has not cared for that at all. That's going to be the first topic we talk about, is rhythmic information on this track, on this movement. The shimmering light over here. Oh, we got like a rising white noise. I think that's hitting cymbals, probably with fuzzy mallets. Couple of noisy elements coming in. That wraps up fairly unceremoniously. So yeah, rhythmically, what this song does for about 7 minutes straight is whole notes. And what a whole note is it's 4 beats of playing. And this entire track is in 4/4, which means that there's 4 beats per bar, and that the quarter note gets the beat. And so every bar is just 1 note. And the whole, everything, the vocals, the instruments underlying, everything changes. You gotta be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's the whole song. Everybody only moves on beat 1. There are a couple of small deviations from that. A couple of times we have held out notes for not 1 bar, but 2. I think the longest held out was 4 bars. And there are some smaller movements where a majority of the instruments will hold out for all 4 beats of the bar, but one lone instrument might change on beat 3 or 4 to act as a leading tone into the new chord. But for a vast majority of that track, everything is just whole notes held out for the entirety of bars over and over and over. There's not a lot of rhythmic information here at all. And because the rhythm is consistently the same and it takes so long to move between notes, I don't really feel anything melodic in here. And a lot of that is due to time feel. Something tells me if we sped this up fourfold maybe, so that each note becomes a quarter note, the condensing down and allowing the notes to change more frequently, I might be able to hear some sort of melodic idea out of that. But what I end up hearing because of the length of time between note changes is a series of chords. This entire thing, at least the first 6 or 7 minutes of it, to me, is just a series of emotionally heavy, high impact chords. And there's definitely something cool in that, I think. It forces the composer to find strength somewhere unusual. I think a lot of music is melody driven. Granted, maybe not so in classical, but I feel like the melody is still a key part of classical music. If you remove that, how are you going to keep people's attention? How are you going to tell a story? You've lost counterpoint. You've lost melodic harmony. The only thing left is chords. How do you tell a story with just chords? Well, that sounds like an interesting restriction to to breed creativity. And I think that's what happened here. The chord progression itself is constantly evolving. We don't have a simple 4-chord loop or an 8-chord loop or anything like that. It feels like it's always moving towards something new. I'm sure that there's probably some patterns being used in here, but to me, it mostly felt linear. And of course, we can look on top of that too. There is, like I mentioned, a melody in the vocals. If you look at them in isolation, speed it up, and I'm sure I could easily feel something melodic out of it. It just takes so long between notes that it doesn't feel melodious to me anymore. But that doesn't mean that it is without melody. There is a melody here. And I think that helps break things up too. The vocals are always moving in a different direction, usually up though. There's always a climbing, an escalation of pitch. Even after we have a few passages, the next passage is going to start at a higher note than the other ones did. And eventually we were starting an entire octave above where most of the passages started. There's enough in here, I think, to keep someone's attention, but if you're looking for direct melodic movement, something to easily listen to, I don't think this is it. You really have to be here for the chords and the progression of the chords and the journey that that's going to take you on, because that's primarily what's here. And I think it does a great job of that. It is emotive. It is captivating. And like I said, it's fairly linear. At least it appears linear to me, where it almost becomes the melody. A slow moving one, sure, but it's linear. Linear chord progression can be melodic. This takes us to the back half of the track then. A drastic uplift in energy, harmonic energy, but also timbre. The drums come in around minute 7, and like I showcased, they're very easy to dance to. They're heavily syncopated, which pushes rather strongly against that let's just play a beat at the beginning of every bar. The syncopation ends up creating something that feels rather groovy and upbeat, and with the little bit of emotional energy that gets risen here too. I mean, for the most part, I think a lot of this song ends up having that same sort of mixed weight that we had on Movement 1, where it is heavy, it is dark. This one is even more lethargic, but there is hints of positivity that creep through it. A lot of this is played through the chord progression. But here we have a few bars, quite a few actually, of just this bright positive energy coming through with this syncopated drum part. It feels more than hopeful. It feels outright positive. The clarinets around the outside are still trying to drag things down. The tempo is still quite slow, but harmonically, what the drums are doing, they signify a change to things. I find that interesting. I can't wait to get to the lyrics on this one and see what's going on there. This one was the one about the words written on the cell, wasn't it? Well, maybe I'm not looking forward to getting to the lyrics on this one. But I mean, even that, it makes me wonder what all is going on here. The ending doesn't quite fit anything else in the song. It's an interesting turn. And I really hope that's what it's supposed to play into. That as heavy and dark as things are, there's always a brighter future. It's the silver lining. Things will get better. I don't know when, but there will be an uptick. And that's the best interpretation I think I have of this track. The last thing I want to bring up before we head into Movement 3, well, the lyrics anyways for this one, is the production on this one's drastically different. No longer do we have the massive wall of sound. We don't have a lot of white noise, or I'd say even drone in this one. It's primarily focused on keeping a strong balance and allowing everything to be listenable and legible and hearable. It's interesting to listen to this after hearing the end of Movement 1. But it also paints a specific picture of Colin Stetson, I think, as an arranger. Which, given that I was told that musically this is all rather similar to the original, that it's really just new instruments, the electric guitars, the drums, and the clarinets, that would be an arrangement, taking an original work and adapting it to fit a new set of instruments, usually with as little modification as necessary. But I don't think that there's any like scientific level to, oh, you've made this many adjustments, it's no longer it's now moving into like cover territory or something like that. It's no longer an arrangement. I don't think there's anything like that, as long as it's still understandable to be based off the original. But the fact that it's still so close to the original in what's on paper, it's only sonically what's changed. That's 100% an arrangement, and that's Colin's role here, assuming that he adapted all of this to this set of instruments. Um, and it's interesting how this paints him as an arranger, though, because most of the time when it comes to arrangement, it's usually from one set of classical instruments, or acoustic instruments, I should say, probably more like it, to another set of acoustic instruments. And I think that's primarily because we don't use the word arrangement for anything dealing with modern music. We just call them covers, and covers kind of covers all the scenarios, whether it's a one-to-one cover, or you've changed a couple of things, you've made alterations to lines or melodies, or you snuck your own guitar solo in there, or you've completely upended the entire thing and you've only kept the lyrics and you wrote a totally new song to it. These are all covered as covers. Never really been a fan of that. It seems too broad of a phrase. I really think we should use arrangement more often. But because it's typically used in classical scenarios, we always think about it as that. And from that perspective, production doesn't really come into it much. You might be thinking about timbres of instruments, but beyond that, there's really not a lot to think about as far as the way things are going to be produced, the engineering side of things. But when it comes to Colin's rendition here, there is. The production of Movement 1 is very different from Movement 2. It's more cluttered. There's more white noise, there's more distortion, there's more layers that he allows to bleed into each other. Movement 2 is about clarity of sound. Everything is completely legible. And so, what I was asking about Movement 1 and it being the wall of sound, that it is difficult for me to parse exactly what's going on with the specifics, that seems to be something that Colin specifically wanted for that part. not something that he was trying to engage with as a whole. I think moving into this Movement 3, I'd like to hear more of what we had on Movement 2 as far as production goes, but it'll be very interesting to see if Colin goes back to something a bit more noisy and overwhelming. Alright, lyrics. So either this is inaccurate, or there is a lot of repetition, which I kind of caught on at the beginning. It felt like the first 2 minutes or so, maybe 3, was the same sentence over and over and over, however, getting through it one syllable at a time. So syllable 1, and then quit singing, and then 1 and then 2, and then quit singing, and then syllables 1, 2, and 3, and quit singing. So you slowly build into the complete sentence. I picked up on this pattern, but I wasn't 100% sure, and I'm still not 100% sure that this is what was going on. If it was in English, I'd be able to tell you, but I'm just going off of familiarity of symbolic sounds. So I could be totally off. But there was certainly a point where what I thought was the pattern that the vocalist was singing was changed, and we had different sounds coming in, or at least they sounded different to me. So there might have been a point where that changed. Regardless, the translation is just, "No, mother, do not weep. Most chaste queen of heaven, support me always." That's a very little amount of words for almost 7, 8 whole minutes of singing. So it does make me wonder what the exact translation is. If this is the poem, if we were to transcribe the lyrics, what would that look like? Because they certainly did not just sing this. There's way too many words in this song for just these few. Now, going back to the topics of theme, of love, I don't necessarily understand this direction, but we do have another maternal connection here, where the first one was from the perspective of a mother whose son was leaving her, and the bittersweet moment of having, your child leave the nest, metaphorically. Here we have the perspective of a child telling their mother to not cry, to just support them. Now, in isolation, I don't really think there's a lot of emotion tied to that, but when you realize that, as I mentioned earlier, that this was inscribed on a wall in the basement of a Gestapo headquarters in Zaropane, that's when it starts to have a little bit more weight to it. Apparently, it is credited to a Helena Wanda Blazusiakona. Probably butchered that last name. It says 18-year-old imprisoned since 26 September 1944. Yeah, that puts a lot of weight on it, and to me, knowing the context brings a lot of sorrow into the equation. It is another bittersweet moment. I think more bitter than anything else, but it is still a poem, or they describe it as a prayer of love. And do not weep for me, just support me always. Even in such a tragic time, we can still find hope and a sort of optimism here. Let's move into this final movement and see how Colin interprets this one. That's quite a bit different than the Beth Gibbons version I just listened to snippet to. really interesting to have it come in at such a volume and fade out. So there's actually two layers there. One sounds like a synth, that's the higher stinger that comes in, but there is a clarinet under that that's trilling 2 notes. There's a lot of reverb on that too, which kind of gives it the feeling of dissipating into fog rather than just a decrescendo bringing the volume down. So there is a general chord progression happening, but there's also a fluctuating of 2 notes. That cyclicality of those 2 tones mixed with all of the trilling going on in here creates a feeling of static cyclicality. That is some really big bass. Another cyclical thing. The strings are just going in this 4-note loop. Lots of elements of just feeling stuck in this. also a distinct lack of dynamics in both movements 2 and 3 that wasn't present in the first. We had plenty of dynamics in that one. Building these small movements on top of a drone. Just realized too, I was asking for dynamics and we finally got some more. You know, compared to some of the much heavier sounds on this performance, this is dramatically lighter, almost feathery. Especially with the way that we have these little bursts of air on each of these notes. trumpet over here? All right, I did not enjoy that one very much. I think I much prefer the Beth Gibbons and Penderecki's version. This one just failed to capture me, really, and I think a lot of it comes down to Colin's type of composition. I like dynamics, and Colin can be good at those. He can certainly create music with large, sweeping, contrasting sections to them, but it's not really what I expect from him. Granted, I've only listened to maybe 5 songs from him, so a very small amount of his work, very small from what I understand. But this is what I expect. Very repetitive, almost trance-like music. And that's what we get on, well, honestly, the final 25 minutes almost of this, the back half of this album. Tracks 2 and 3 are hyper-focused on one main idea each. 3, we kind of get it split in half here. A heavier version of it and a lighter version of it. But the end result is still a 14-minute song that feels very similar throughout, aside from the opening couple of minutes where we had the very dissonant, very tense, I don't think it was tremolo bowing, I think it was 16th note bowing. It was a very tense beginning to this track, but once we removed that from the equation and we focused on more of the consonant harmony, it was a song that just kind of continued to do its thing. The vocals gave us a lead melody that kind of helped distract from it, but once the vocals quit out 7 minutes into the song or so, we just had this pattern. And you have to really love that. Otherwise, there's nothing else to listen to here. And I found that I quickly did not love that. And it just kept going and going and going. And there's some cool things that went in there. I'm not saying it's a bad section, it just doesn't justify 5 whole minutes of itself. I'm curious. Well, no, I'm not. I know this. We checked out this same exact movement a couple of years back, and I don't think I made any comments about the end of that dragging out for too long. So either that one was changed in a way that didn't have this, or Colin made it this way on purpose, deviating a bit from the original. I suppose there is a third option, where both the Beth Gibbons version and Colin's version are different than the original, both doing their own thing. But like I said, I didn't have any negative comments about the length and repetition last time we checked out this movement. So I have to assume that's just a Colin Stetson thing, in which case I didn't really do too well with it. But I mentioned there were some cool things on it, and one is primarily the dynamics. We start off with a ton of tension. It's a very big, heavy part of the song. We eventually remove that and find something a bit more consonant before moving into the final movement of this, or the final passage of this, which reduces the volume by quite a bit, reduces a lot of the heavier and distorted tones, and gives us just this very light finale. And of course, that gets quieter and quieter and quieter. We never quite hit the same volume that we saw at the beginning of movement one, that was almost too quiet to hear, but we do have diminishing volume on this. So I enjoyed that. And I think the idea of listening to woodwind instruments get quieter and quieter, reaching that threshold point of barely making tones, I dig that. I really do. I think there's a lot of cool things to read into that thematically. And it's always going to be something that, as a musician myself, an aerophone musician, I'm going to appreciate the skill that goes into that. It isn't quite as bombastic or overt as somebody who can play loud or play really high things or play very fast. Those are all very flashy. And it's immediately obvious that these people are putting a lot of skill into it. But it's things like this, the very subtle ideas that differentiate between a masterful performance and a novice performance. And I can hear a lot of that in here. The skill it takes to just tread that line. I don't know if that's the phrase I wanted. To just barely walk that line, to reduce volume over and over and over, and continuing to have the air pressure and air support to continue to play these instruments at such a quiet level, while also still showcasing that right on the threshold element where your instrument is just about to give out and you're just going to have that air moving through it. It's impressive if you've ever tried anything like this before. It's just not flashy. It's not apparent to non-musicians. So, like I said, there's a lot to love in this track, and the vocal melody is absolutely gorgeous. This vocalist is just, I'm going to assume it's the same vocalist for all three movements. Amazing. The vocal presence, the placement of the vocals, the width, the power, the vibrato, the range. I mean, this you could tell they're classically trained. It's just phenomenal, though. It's something I haven't really touched on yet, but yeah, the vocal performance is amazing, 100%. And they do a great job, I think, of injecting emotion into it. Um, it never really clicked with me in a way that really impacted me and hit me. But I think that's me. First of all, I'm just listening analytically to a lot of this, and that usually puts up a little bit of a barrier for an emotional connection. I think if I just put this on, without the camera on, without trying to listen to everything and remember everything and create, a series of topics to talk about for the analysis segment, and I just feel it, I think it'll hit me. So, like I said, I'm going to put that one on me. But yeah, I didn't really connect with the emotions of the lyrics, vocals on this. But I don't want to discredit that either. I think that they're done with a lot of emotional integrity. I mean, some of these notes, it's not just about hitting the note. It's not just about having the proper air support, but I think there's an emotional delivery to a lot of it too. That just, I mean, this vocalist just sells it every single time. Now, on the topic of dynamics, though, I mentioned that we have some dynamics on this one. We had very little on movement two. We had more on one. I think one had the most, but it also was longer than both movements two and three combined. And honestly, once we get into a groove of things, we don't really have a lot of dynamic movement. That entire wall of sound post metal section that lasted for like 8 minutes, around I don't know, somewhere between minutes 10 and 15, somewhere closer to the middle of that movement. Just solid volume level, solid layer of instruments. It doesn't really change much. I think it is a blessing and a curse. A good, nah, that's weird. It's a double-edged sword. That might be the way to put it. In the perspective of creating post metal, I think that this works, and this is a very cool bridge track to bring classical music to metalheads, particularly if you're very fond of this type of slow burn, atmospheric heavy post metal. But the inverse of that is that, as with a lot of metal renditions of classical music, the lack of dynamics actually kind of hurts the chances of bringing a classical enjoyer into the realm of metal. It's a one-way bridge, it seems. And I've found the lack of dynamics to more often be a detriment than anything else. But like I've mentioned a couple times, if you're a metalhead, you like these heavily repeated things, you just like to zone out, you get into that trance and just enjoy it. Maybe you'll just like putting this type of music on in the background while you surf the internet or something. I don't know. This is really great for you. It takes something that I think normally requires a bit more attention and creates something a bit more static out of it. And I don't think it necessarily is worse off for that. I want to make that clear. I do think there's a lot of emotional resonance in here, and in places, I think that this might actually be more emotionally resonant because of the access to the white noise and distorted sounds that probably aren't accessible in the orchestral versions. There is a wider range of sounds to play with, and I'm sure that some of the more overwhelming parts of this rendition don't feel as strongly overpowering as they might in the other. Again, I'm making a hypothesis here. I don't know if that's accurate or not. It's a guess that I have. But like I mentioned when we hit Movement 3, that opening does not sound like anything of what I remember of Beth Gibbons' version. So there's that entire thing too. Like I said, it's not necessarily worse off or better off. It's just different. And if you enjoy this sonic palette a little more, whew, then this is probably going to be a way to get you to listen to some classical music and bring it into a series of instruments and a group of timbres that's more palatable to your ears. But like I said, for me, it never quite caught my attention that way. But I'm not a real big fan of this kind of sound in metal, anyways. Um, let's hit some lyrics. 2 hours, good gravy. Let's hit some lyrics, and we're gonna wrap this video up. Now, I actually vaguely remember these lyrics. At least I don't remember like individual stanzas or anything, but the general concept of it rung a bell as soon as I started reading them. I was like, oh yeah, I remember this. It's a folk song in the dialect of the Apole region. It's about a woman whose son is lost. Well, she doesn't know where he is, but she does know that he's been killed. I kind of understood this to be a bit vaguer than it is, but now that I've gone back to the first stanza, it's pretty clear she knows. She just doesn't know where the body is, and she's in a lot of distress because of this. She says, "Where has he gone, my dearest son? Perhaps during the uprising the cruel enemy killed him. You bad people, in the name of God, the most holy, why did you kill my son? Never again will I have his support, even if I cry out my old eyes out. Were my bitter tears to create another river Oder, they would not restore to life my son." Basically, oh, it is hypothesized. Perhaps the cruel enemy killed him. Okay. She leans into this though. She's pretty sure that her son's dead somewhere. But basically says, my son's missing. What if he's been killed? How dare you do that? To never have my son again. Even if I cried my eyes out, the tears that filled, if they could fill an entire river, it still would not bring my son back to me. Says he lies in his grave and I know not where. Perhaps the poor child lies in a rough ditch, and instead he could be lying in his warm bed. Sing for him, God's little songbird, since his mother cannot find him. And you, God's little flowers, may you blossom all around so that my son may sleep happily. So yeah, again, this one not really bittersweet. That's not the word I think is good for it, but it is a song of sorrow born of love. To have such strong emotion and attachment to somebody and not know where they are in the middle of a big crisis. She mentioned that there's an uprising and wonders if he died sometime during this. And if so, he could literally be, his body could literally be anywhere. He can't even be properly buried. And this is just stress upon distress upon distress on this woman. And she just asks for everything. She's asking everybody, have you seen him? She asks the birds to sing for him, the flowers to grow around him. Just please, no matter where he is, make his life comfortable or his death comfortable. Give him a good burial of some sort. Just anything to bring peace to him, physically or even spiritually. And it's just, it's heartbreaking. I can't imagine it. I really can't. To not know where your child's at, especially at a time like this or an area where she's at where there's a violence that he could have been caught up in. Just it's a really heavy poem. And I have to ask where the end of the song comes from. Because we end on the idea of can the birds sing for him since I cannot? Can the flowers blossom around him so that he may sleep happily? And then the song gets lighter. Almost as if this burden has been lifted, but it hasn't, not lyrically. I think it makes sense for the song to go into this direction and to sort of have that soft fade out. Granted, maybe not over the 7 minutes it does, but I think it makes sense to lighten things up, especially as we started out super heavy. We reduced that a little bit for the vocal bit. Now that the vocals are out, we've removed the electric guitars entirely and have focused on this decrescendo, a decrease of volume. But I don't think that really fits with the lyrics. So I don't know. Like I said, as a bridge album, a bridge interpretation of this, I think it works fine. I'm sure there's a lot of metalheads who will enjoy this quite a bit. There's some fantastic atmospheres and textures in here. The first track has a massive wall of sound, if that's your jam, and it's a way to bring some classical music to people who might not normally enjoy that. As far as I'm concerned, though, this is not my favorite rendition of this movement, and I would wager it's not my favorite rendition of the first and second movements either, though I have not heard any other rendition. But I would wager that I would enjoy a more traditional approach to them more than I enjoyed this, simply because the metallic side, while it does have some benefits, like I said, it's sort of like a double-edged sword. You gain some things, you lose some things. The lack of dynamics just overall did not really work for me. But these are just my thoughts on Colin Stetson's, what is this? Oh, Sorrow is the name of the album. All 3 movements to it. What are your thoughts, though? Did you enjoy this? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on? You have your own interpretation of things, your own opinions, your own thoughts. Please put all of that in the comment section. I do want to thank everyone for staying. If you're still here, 2 hours is a long time for a video. And to think I still have to do 2 full album videos this week, which are like They take forever to record. It's going to be a big work week, I think. Anyways, thanks everyone for sticking out on this one. Comments. Oh yeah, above the comment section in the description box is a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today, but I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.